Thank you very much. Beyond every dataset, there are people that are making really effort. That's why I want to start the slide with presenting the people that contributed to having the data that were then generated by Sam Oxon, the guy with the fish in the hands, was not taken in Alaska, okay? That was a picture actually taken in South Carolina, where Sam is located. He's working for a gold mining company there after graduating as a master's student from the University of Georgia. He did the project during the pandemic. And therefore, unfortunately for him, there was no opportunity to go to the Aleutians. So he worked on samples that were collected 10 years ago, precisely in September 2015, by the rock team on the top there. You recognize some faces. Michelle, the true volcanologist expert of Alaskan rocks. So holy Michelle. We're defending. Then Elizabeth Grant, who is one of the organizers of the workshop, Catherine Shepard, and Catherine and Elizabeth were undergraduate students at the time. The stupid man over there is me, the postdoc from the Smithsonian, whose boss was Elizabeth Cottrell, also the leader of the Leg 3 of a large initiative sponsored by the GeoPrism NSF program. And there were three major leaders at the time. The Leg 1 led by Terry Plank, the Leg 2, Diana Roman too. Leg 2 led by Peter Kellerman, and the third one led by Elizabeth Cottrell with Catherine Kelly, that at that time could not come because she became mother of a new baby, so therefore she was remotely supporting us. And then also, even though people were not all dedicated to sampling rocks, I think I'm being very lucky, blessed to belong to a very healthy working environment. There were also other people that were collecting gases like Tarin and Tobias Fischer, today presented by Felipe, is a PhD student who is participating in this workshop. Then John Lyons, then Kettner from a seismic effort. And so for me, was one of the best experiences in my life. Actually, it's the best fieldwork I've ever done, to be an explorer. So essentially to even go to see rocks that nobody has documented before, which actually is also a tough task, especially when you are alone without Michelle. You say, oh, what the fuck, you know, now. So anyhow, just as a reminder, when we are in the Western Aleutians, we start to enter to a different tectonic setting, which unfortunately is very poorly explored. At the moment, petrologists, geochemists, isotope geologists, they try their best to evaluate what are also the tectonic background component influencing the chemical composition of the erupted products. However, geochemistry or petrology alone, they are not sufficient to detail the architecture of the lithosphere below. So therefore, I'm not going... the geophysics is demanded. That is the take-home message. Now, going there, so going west, as I recommended earlier this morning, but not too far, be careful, okay? So remaining the US side, essentially. So we try to essentially understand what is going on in this area. I want to thank Gino Yogodinsky, who is a sort of neighbor for me. He's based in Columbia, in South Carolina, not far away from Athens, Georgia, that actually presented this type of idea. But however, the problem is this type of tectonic drawing, but the problem is we don't have constraints. And on the right-hand side, I want to show you even islands that are not constantly monitored, like Kiska, that does not have deployed instruments, to the best of my knowledge. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So they are active islands. As you can see from these peaks, that's the original map of Robert Coates, who is the first geologist that went there after the Second World War. Kiska was also a battlefield, so we saw a lot of junk from World War II over there. And if you see the map, the satellite image below, there is a new land that was generated. So there is a new lava flow. It was somehow, anyhow, generated that nobody has documented in detail because there is no one living there and monitoring. We've been sampling also these new rocks, essentially. And this is a picture actually taken in Gareloi. Here, John Lyons inspecting a solar panel has been damaged. And I had a proposal at the time. I promise I was not drunk, which is more worrisome. I propose that there were two last seagulls trained by the Empire of Japan to be kamikaze against US facilities, but then the proposal failed because we never found the skeletons of these seagulls. So probably there were rocks, flying rocks, and guess what? Maybe some activity also not documented, not reported, and maybe damaging even these facilities. So we are in active volcanoes. And I don't know why there is no peak here. Anyhow, try to use your fantasy. So essentially, over here, what I wanted to show is a little bit of what we know about the proposals. This actually comes from a pretty seminal paper by K&K in 1994, after other papers were published already in the early 80s. This showing that the trend from polyethylene to calc-alkaline is strongly controlled by tectonics, and therefore there are tectonic components, therefore configuration of stresses, they should essentially determine whether you have differentiation made in the shallow level of the continental crust or polybaric differentiation, which is more typical for calc-alkaline systems. And that's a plot I presented also earlier, but move on, just trying to use the TAS diagram to detail a little better what is going on in the Western Aleutians. I want to show you essentially that there is, also a slide is missing here. That's a big problem because I cannot show. So anyhow, what you have is, unfortunately, I'm not as tall as Ronnie, so I need to jump to show some data. But essentially you have data, so rocks like garrelloid that is also alkaline rich. Oh, thank you. That's nice. That's stretching. So you have alkaline rocks, but strongly polyethylene. So if you go upward, you are more a polyethylene trend. If you go downward, is less alkaline rich, but also more calc-alkaline. And then you have also two trends where the falsification of the generation of more silica-rich magmas tend to be much more pronounced in calc-alkaline trends compared to the polyethylene ones. And what is interesting is moving that, especially from garrelloid, all the way to Buldir, and then also including data from Jogodinsky's research group, which are also the dredge samples mentioned by Susanna during her talk. You can see that there is even a transition going from polyethylene to calc-alkaline, which is very exciting for a pretty limited sector. Again, we speak about several hundreds of miles distance, but still, compared to the entire extension of the Aleutians, is pretty cool. So no slides at all, so let's move on. Easy. So what we need to do? So essentially we have, in my perspective, what will be interesting is also taking advantage of geodata, hopefully also publications, at least from more recent papers, is trying to divide also the samples based on sampling sites, extension of the different rock units, rock age, then to use, of course, existing databases, and then generate also new data, but using existing rocks. So for the first part, I move completely in a different environment, the Ibrea Verbano zone in north part of Italy, that I'm working on a drilling project called the DIVE, where we are trying to drill into the crust-mantle interface. Essentially over here, you can see an example of sampling bias. Everyone collected along the road cuts, not going internally because it's very vegetated, steep sides. Italians are like me and very lazy. So then the rocks, as you can see, these are plot show a lot of data, but then if you have the rock age differentiation, then you start to observe the data, the trends much better. These are, for instance, rocks between Paleozoic age against magmatic Permian rocks. And then you can argue about a liquid line of descent, fractional crystallization, crustal assimilation, and so forth. And then that's the last slide. So we live not in the right moment. So I did not expect as an Italian to run away from Italy to find out that Italy found it here, and therefore to see the distrust with respect to science, now cutting funds because scientists suck, so all this very bullshit anyhow. So the thing is, so probably the picture is not really promising that to propose a project is very ambitious, like going back again to collect new rocks in the Aleutians to be less likely to be funded. And therefore, maybe to lower down a little bit our ambitions for a while, at least, I hope. So, and maybe to work on existing data sets, rocks were not documented, were not fully explored. And that's why I also had maybe let's rely on geodiva, let's do some cool work, still knocking on the door for funds, but then more dedicated on rocks that we have already in the backyard, essentially. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for Mattia as we transition?
Later.
Later.